The original PlayStation arrived at the perfect moment and completely reshaped what video games could be. It brought 3D worlds, new ideas, and a style nobody else had. In this video, I'm taking a look back at why the original PlayStation was such a breakthrough, what made it unforgettable, and whether or not it's still worth hunting down the old hardware these days. The original PlayStation story actually starts with a deal that completely fell apart. Back in the early 90s, Sony teamed up with Nintendo to create a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. They even built working prototypes, a strange hybrid console now known as the Nintendo PlayStation, with SNES cartridges up top and a Sony CD drive underneath. Right before things were finalized, Nintendo walked away from the deal and partnered with Philips instead, bringing the entire project to an abrupt end. Sony was left standing there with nothing but their research, a scrapped partnership, and a very motivated engineering team. The PlayStation finally launched in Japan on December 3rd, 1994, and hit North America on September 9th, 1995, and the timing could not have been better. The Sega Saturn arrived first, but it was expensive and notoriously difficult to develop for. The Nintendo 64 promised a ton of power, but it wouldn't launch for almost another year, and still relied on costly cartridges with tiny storage compared to CDs. Meanwhile, systems like the 3DO and Atari Jaguar were either priced too high or struggling to stay relevant. Sony saw the opening. Their strategy was simple but brilliant. Build a console designed for 3D from the ground up. Use CD-ROMs for cheaper and bigger games. Give developers easy tools to work with. And market it directly to teens and young adults who wanted something cool and modern. And it worked. Developers flocked to the PS1, competitors stumbled, and suddenly Sony, the total newcomer, became the natural home for the entire 3D generation. When the PlayStation launched in the US, its games immediately showed players what this new machine could do. Ridge Racer delivered silky smooth arcade racing that felt shockingly close to the arcade version. Rayman showed off beautiful hand-drawn 2D art, proof that the PS1 wasn't limited to the new polygon craze. And Battle Arena Toshinden brought flashy 3D weapon combat that looked incredibly advanced for the time. The PlayStation's launch games made a strong first impression. They were stylish, fast, and noticeably bigger and bolder than anything its cartridge-based competitors were offering. Studios were figuring out 3D game design in real time. Everyone experimented with cameras, controls, perspectives. There was no rulebook yet. CD-ROM storage gave them room for big soundtracks and full-motion video, helping smooth over the rough edges. But everyone who owned a PS1 remembers something else too. The look of those early 3D games. The console used a fine texture mapping and didn't have a true Z buffer, which caused a few very recognizable quirks. Textures that wobbled or swam, geometry that seemed to breathe or flex, and jagged edges that popped in and out. Today we know this as things like vertex snapping, but back then it was just how PlayStation games looked. And it wasn't just early titles. This aesthetic stuck around for the entire generation. Developers simply got better at hiding it with smarter camera work and stronger art direction. This messy, ambitious period laid the foundation for the PS1's mid-generation classics, which is where the console truly took off. Once developers understood the PlayStation's hardware, the mid-generation wave hit. And this is the moment that turned the PS1 from impressive new console into a cultural phenomenon. Crash Bandicoot exploded onto the scene and instantly became Sony's unofficial mascot, and quickly became the game people pointed to when talking about the PS1's power, with vibrant 3D worlds, quick pacing, and a ton of style. Then Final Fantasy VII arrived and changed the industry overnight. For many players, this was the game that made RPGs mainstream. It brought cinematic storytelling, emotional cutscenes, and a sense of scale that only CD-ROMs could deliver. That same year, Castlevania Symphony of the Night pushed 2D design forward at a time when everyone else was ditching it, helping define the entire Metroidvania genre. And then came Metal Gear Solid, which redefined what a story-driven game could even be, combining sneaking, sound detection, and enemy patterns with voice acting, dramatic cutscenes, and a sense of presentation that felt closer to film than a typical video game. It proved that storytelling, performance, and gameplay could all support each other on a console. Modern racing sims were born with Gran Turismo, which took the ideas of PC racing sims and made them mainstream, bringing realistic handling, physics, and car progression to console players, and raising the bar for every racing game that followed. Survival horror took shape with Resident Evil, a game that blended fixed camera tension, limited resources, and slow, deliberate pacing to create an atmosphere that players had never experienced before. It defined the blueprint for the genre, showing how fear, exploration, and environmental storytelling could all work together inside a fully 3D world. Layer on top of that the massive hits Tekken 3, Spyro the Dragon, Parappa the Rapper, and countless others, and you have a library that hit every genre and every type of player. This era is why nostalgia for the PlayStation is so strong today, and the strength of these games helped it jump from underdog status to a defining force in the industry, with enough momentum to carry it through its later years. By the late 90s, the PlayStation was starting to show its age. Newer systems like the Sega Dreamcast and Sony's own PS2 were pushing far more polygons, with cleaner textures and smoother 3D worlds. Compared to those, PS1 graphics looked rougher, blockier, and unmistakably first-generation 3D. But the PlayStation didn't slow down. Its library was massive and incredibly diverse, and demand stayed strong. To keep the momentum going, Sony released the PS1, a smaller, sleeker redesign that made the system lighter, more portable, and perfect for younger players or anyone just getting into gaming. It extended the PS1's lifespan and kept it visible on store shelves long after most consoles would have faded. By the time Sony officially moved on, the PS1 had sold over 100 million units, making it the best-selling home console ever released up to that point. It outsold every competitor in its generation by a wide margin. For a lot of people, the PS1 was their first real step into 3D gaming, the first console where worlds felt big, characters felt alive, and stories felt cinematic. Sony carried the original PlayStation into the future with built-in backwards compatibility on the PS2 and PS3. If you had a disc, you just popped it in and played. On the digital side, the PS3 store also keeps the PS1 going by selling re-releases of classic and even rare PS1 games, all at surprisingly low prices that make them easy to pick up. A handful of those titles even support cross-buy, meaning one purchase on PS3 can carry forward to the PS4 and PS5 re-releases. For as iconic as the PlayStation was in the 90s, its biggest impact didn't come from sales or specs, it came from what it allowed developers to do. The system opened the door to ideas that weren't possible on earlier hardware. CD-ROMs offered more space, Sony's tools were flexible, and the platform welcomed new voices. Suddenly, bigger stories, stranger concepts, and ambitious new genres became possible, and developers took full advantage. It also changed expectations for what games could feel like. Music, mood, and atmosphere suddenly mattered just as much as gameplay. Developers leaned into style, tone, and presentation in ways that hadn't been possible on cartridge-based systems. And the console itself carried a kind of rebellious, stylish identity, something edgier and more grown-up than what players were used to. It spoke to teenagers and young adults who wanted games that matched the culture they were living in. Even its hardware quirks, the wobbly textures, the chunky polygons, ended up defining an entire aesthetic. That low poly look has become instantly recognizable, not as a flaw, but as a piece of gaming history with its own charm. All of these things, the new genres, the cinematic storytelling, the stylish identity, even the hardware quirks, came together to create a system that marked a real shift in what games could be. It pushed the medium forward in a way that players could feel, and its influence is still all over the industry today. And that brings us to the big question. Is the original PlayStation hardware still worth owning nowadays? Of course, I think the games are still worth playing. The real question is how you should play them today, and thankfully, you've got options. If you want the most authentic experience, the original PS1 is still a great choice. It looks best on a CRT TV. The controllers feel exactly the way you remember, and there's even modern upgrades like Bluetooth receivers if you want wireless gamepads. 8-Bit Do was kind enough to send me some of what they're offering, including a wireless receiver that plugs right into the controller port and lets you use almost any Bluetooth controller on the PS1 or PS2. They've also got a really high quality gamepad called the Pro 3. It works on computers, the Switch, and through that receiver, it makes a fantastic PS1 controller. Now, if you want to go the modding route, which I highly recommend you do, the original PlayStation model is one of the easiest systems to install a mod chip into. That means you can boot burned disks for tools like 240p Test Suite, which helps you set up and calibrate a CRT, or run backups of your pricier games so you don't have to risk scratching the originals. Dang things are so expensive now. The PS1 is the later revision of the PlayStation. Same hardware, just in a compact, lightweight design. It's reliable and looks great on display, which makes it a popular choice for collectors. If you just want a clean, simple way to revisit PS1 games, the PS2 is a great choice. Most systems run PS1 discs with no trouble at all, along with DVDs, which look awesome on CRTs. And the larger PS2 memory cards make your saves far easier to manage. Then there's the PS3, which every model plays PS1 discs, and even through HDMI. It's one of the cleanest ways to get PS1 games onto a modern TV. And the digital PS1 classics we talked about earlier are cheap and a legal way to own a ton of the more rare PS1 games. And then we have the PlayStation Classic, which exists. But it's shipped with a questionable lineup of games and even used the slower PAL versions of certain games. This console is so cute and compact. They did a lot right with this console, but also a lot wrong. I really wouldn't recommend this unless you're modding it and filling it up with your own backups. On the current side, the PS5 has begun adding PS1 classics again, though the library is still tiny and inconsistent. These games are usually upscaled a lot and don't really look much like they do on the older hardware. Some people love the high-resolution upscaled effect, and some really don't. Most of these newer releases even have trophies, so it could be worth checking these out if that's something you enjoy. And of course, there's emulation, what could be seen as the ultimate solution. It's free and the most customizable experience you can get. I personally enjoy the emulator DuckStation, which offers near perfect accuracy with optional graphical enhancements, save states, and if you have a library of PS1 discs, it can even run the discs directly from an external disk drive. But of course, you can also rip your own discs with free tools like Image Burn to build a clean digital library. The bottom line is that every method has its strengths. It all depends on whether you want the most authentic experience or the most convenient one. The PlayStation was truly a defining moment in 3D gaming. Its worlds, characters, and ideas sparked imaginations in a way that still resonates today. And its library is just as fun to explore now as it was back then. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it. And check out this other video where I tried to buy an original Dreamcast and ended up on a crazy adventure. That video was nuts. Thanks for your time today. Goodbye.